The top tonight, law officers in Gregory are investigating a disturbing homicide. It involves the suspicious death of a 4-year-old boy. It turns out he was one of 8 children ranging in age from 10 months all the way up to 7 years old. And tonight, the boy's mother has been charged with causing his death. Our Brian Burns has tonight's top story from Gregory. He tells us what authorities are releasing about this case so far.
This is where the family lived at the Gregory Housing Authority.
I think it's a really sad situation. We see the kids out here all the time. She doesn't have a lot of kids, but it looked like she was doing all right with them, you know. They would go to school, she'll pick them up, take them out. It's just a messed up situation.
A neighbor reacting to the arrest of 26-year-old Tawana Roberson on Thursday on a charge of capital murder of a child under the age of 6. Police say it began Tuesday afternoon when Tawana brought her 4-year-old son to a Portland emergency room, complaining he was sick. ER personnel termed the case suspicious, and by the time police arrived, CPR was being performed on the child.
He was transported to Driscoll Children's Hospital via the Driscoll Children's Hospital's ambulance. I then met the family and EMS personnel at Driscoll Children's Hospital. I was notified that the child was pronounced dead.
Chief Cano says once they began their investigation with the help of Texas Rangers, they made a break in the case.
After 3 days of investigations and interviews and such, we were able to obtain a warrant for capital murder and arrested the young boy's mother. She was taken into custody yesterday evening and was transported to the San Patricio County Sheriff's Office.
The rest of Roberson's children were removed on Wednesday.
Currently, the 7 siblings are in foster care and all their needs are currently being met. And a case has been filed in a San Patricio County court to where a judge will be overseeing the case involving the children in foster care.
The investigation continues. Roberson is in the county jail on a $400,000 bond. All the residents we spoke with were saddened to hear what happened and that Roberson had been arrested. From the Gregory Housing Authority, Brian Burns, 3 News.
Brian, thank you. It was a